United States has great strength and patience. But if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime. No nation on earth has an interest in seeing this band of criminals arm itself with nuclear weapons and missiles.
President Trump at the United Nations today, a speech that's getting a lot of reaction here and around the world. A Democratic senator saying this, Democrat Dianne Feinstein, President Trump's bombastic threat to destroy North Korea and his refusal to present any positive pathways forward on many global challenges we face are severe disappointments. He aims to unify the world through tactics of intimidation, but in reality, he only further isolates the United States. Many Republicans came out with very positive tweets and reaction, as well as the Israeli Prime Minister with a big kudos. Let's bring in our panel now. Joining me here at the White House, Catherine Lucy, White House reporter for the Associated Press. From our Washington bureau, Katie Pavlich, news editor at townhall.com, and Charles Hurt, opinion editor for the Washington Times. Okay, Catherine, it was bold. It was direct.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, he really put the world on notice today. This was a president who came in with a clear message he wanted to deliver. And if you've been watching his speeches, throughout this year and through the campaign, it really was a continuation of a vision we've seen from him before. This was a dark interpretation of the state of affairs in the world, but it revealed his frustration and the way he thinks, and it's the way he thinks he needs to deliver the message. This is the kind of rhetoric he is comfortable with. This is the way he wants to communicate. He wanted to make a stand today.
Yeah, and we've seen these kinds of speeches before. Charlie, I mentioned Saudi Arabia and Warsaw, these kind of big speeches, and it is a bit of a Trump doctrine that's forming here.
No, absolutely, and I think a fairly consistent Trump doctrine, and such an enormous departure from the kind of speeches that you would hear from President Obama just a year ago when President Obama was giving a similar speech before the UN. He was talking about how America had to learn to sort of subjugate its interests for the interests of other countries, and to sort of rein in some of our freedom in order to make a better, grander world. Well, Donald Trump went out there and he started with hard power, talking about how much more money we're going to invest in our military and how we're going to be the most powerful military that we've ever been, and then went on to name names in terms of calling out enemies, and then went on to even criticize the UN for completely failing in central parts of its mission. And I look back, I cannot think of another, even George W. Bush, who got sort of criticized for being somewhat of a cowboy, wouldn't have delivered a speech like this. This is tough stuff, and I think a lot of people are thrilled to hear it.
Yeah, Katie, he didn't mention Russia and China except for once in the speech. I want to play this soundbite. Russia and China, the leaders there were not in the room at the time, but here's that part.
We must reject threats to sovereignty from the Ukraine to the South China Sea. It is time for North Korea to realize that the denuclearization is its only acceptable future. And I want to thank China and Russia for joining the vote to impose sanctions, along with all of the other members of the Security Council.
I said he didn't mention China except for that once, but obviously the North Korea part was aimed at China specifically.
Well, this is going to be the next step here. We saw a lot coming from President Trump today in terms of rhetoric, and he is a man who expects results. And we've had these votes on sanctions twice now. The Chinese and the Russians have signed on to them, and the question going forward is going to be, do those sanctions get enforced, and does the UN make sure that those sanctions get enforced? But in terms of the general message and theme of President Trump's speech, he really did reject globalism in the sense, as Charlie was saying, of Americans giving up some of their ideology to fit into this global international community, but at the same time did not reject international partnerships with different countries in terms of solving big problems on North Korea and Iran. And I think that goes to show that he's very serious about this America first, but not alone message, and his words back that up today.
Catherine, what about the kind of tease about the Iran nuclear deal? Seemed like he suggested there will be some sort of change.
It's possible. He didn't tell us today what's going to happen with that. Obviously, he had tough rhetoric today. He has been very clear. He was vocal last week that he is not happy with the deal. He has criticized the deal. We're going to have to wait a little bit longer, I think, to see exactly what he does with that.
I'll be asking Secretary of State Tillerson about that next hour. Charlie, final thoughts on the broad messaging here. I mean, you've got North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, radical Islamic terrorism taking a target to all of that.
Yeah. Well, again, much like everything that we've seen with the Trump presidency from his election, it really, so much of it is a rejection of the previous administration and the previous administrations, whether it's strategic patience in North Korea or the Iran deal, or Russia's entanglement, broadening entanglement all over its region, and interference in our election. This really is not only a domestic slap in the face to the previous administration. What we're seeing here is a stark departure from the Obama administration's policies.